Rambler number 3, Tuesday, March 27th, 1750. Undisappointed in designs, with native honors virtue shines, nor takes up powers, nor lays it down, as giddy rambles smile or frown. Elphinston. The task of an author is either to teach what is not known, or to recommend known truths by his manner of adorning them, either to let new light in upon the mind and open new scenes to the prospect, or to vary the dress and situation of common objects so as to give them fresh grace and more powerful attractions, to spread such flowers over the regions through which the intellect has already made its progress as may tempt it to return and take a second view of things hastily passed over or negligently regarded. Either of these labors is very difficult, because, that they may not be fruitless, men must not only be persuaded of their errors, but reconciled to their guide. They must not only confess their ignorance, but, what is still less pleasing, must allow that he from whom they are to learn is more knowing than themselves. It might be imagined that such an employment was in itself sufficiently irksome and hazardous, that none would be found so malevolent as wantingly to add weight to the stone of Sisyphus, and that few endeavors would be used to obstruct those advances to reputation which must be made at such an expense of time and thought, with so great hazard in their miscarriage, and with so little advantage from the success. Yet there is a certain race of men that either imagine it their duty, or make it their amusement, to hinder the reception of every work of learning or genius, who stand as sentinels in the avenues of fame, and value themselves upon giving ignorance and envy the first notice of a prey. To these men, who distinguish themselves by the appellation of critics, it is necessary for a new author to find some means of recommendation. It is probable that the most malignant of these persecutors might be somewhat softened and prevailed on, for a short time, to remit their fury. Having for this purpose considered many expedients, I find in the records of ancient times that Argus was lulled by music, and Cerberus quieted with a sop, and am therefore inclined to believe that modern critics who, if they have not the eyes, have the watchfulness of Argus, and can bark as loud as Cerberus, though perhaps they cannot bite with equal force. Though perhaps they cannot bite with equal force, might be subdued by methods of the same kind. I have learned how some have been pacified with claret and a supper, and others laid asleep with the soft notes of flattery. Though the nature of my undertaking gives me sufficient reason to dread the united attacks of this virulent generation, yet I have not hitherto persuaded myself to take any measures for flight or treaty. For I am in doubt whether they can act against me by lawful authority, and suspect that they have presumed upon a forged commission, styled themselves the ministers of criticism without any authentic evidence of delegation, and utter their own determinisms as the decrees of a higher judicature. Criticism, from whom they derived their claim to decide the fate of writers, was the eldest daughter of labor and of truth. She was at her birth committed to the care of justice, and brought up by her in the palace of wisdom. Being soon distinguished by the celestials for her uncommon qualities, she was appointed the governess of fancy, and empowered to beat time to the chorus of the Muses, when they sung before the throne of Jupiter. When the Muses condescended to visit this lower world, they came accompanied by criticism, to whom, upon her descent from the native regions, Justice gave a scepter, to be carried aloft in her right hand, one end of which was tinctured with ambrosia and enwreathed with a golden foliage of amaranths and bays. The other end was encircled with cypress and poppies and dipped in the waters of oblivion. In her left hand she bore an unextinguishable torch, manufactured by labor and lighted by truth, by which it was the particular quality immediately to show everything in its true form, however it might be distinguished to common eyes. Whatever art could complicate or folly could confound was, upon the first gleam of the torch of truth, exhibited in its distinct parts and original simplicity. It darted through the labyrinths of sophistry, and showed at once all the absurdities to which they served for refuge. It pierced through the robes which rhetoric often sold to falsehood, and detected the disproportion of parts which artificial veils had been contrived to cover. Thus furnished for the execution of her office, criticism came down to survey the performances of those who professed themselves the votaries of the Muses. Whatever was brought before her, she beheld by the stately light of the torch of truth, and when her examination had convinced her that the laws of just writing had been observed, she touched it with the amaranthine end of the scepter, and consigned it over to immortality. But it more frequently happened that in the works which required her inspection there was some imposture attempted, that false colors were laboriously laid, that some secret inequity was found between the words and sentiments, or some dissimilitude of the ideas and the original subjects, that incongruities were linked together, or that some parts were of no use but to enlarge the appearance of the whole, without contributing to its beauty, solidity, or usefulness. Wherever such discoveries were made, and they were made wherever these faults committed, criticism refused the touch which conferred the sanctity of immortality, and when the errors were frequent and gross, reversed the scepter, and let drops of lethe distill from the poppies and cypress, a fatal mildew, which immediately began to waste the work away, till it was at last totally destroyed. There were some compositions brought to the test in which, when the strongest light was thrown upon them, the beauties and faults appeared so equally mingled that criticism stood with her scepter poised in her hand, in doubt whether to shed lethe or ambrosia upon them. These at last increased to so great a number that she was weary of attending such doubtful claims, and, for fear of using improperly the scepter of justice, referred the cause to be considered by time. The proceedings of time, though very dilatory, were some few caprices accepted, conformable to justice. And many who thought themselves secure by a short forbearance have sunk under her scythe, as they were posting down with their volumes in triumph to futurity. It was observable that some were destroyed by little, and others crushed forever by a single blow. Criticism, having long kept her eye fixed steadily upon time, this was at last so well satisfied with his conduct that she withdrew from the earth, and with her patroness Astrea, and left prejudice and false taste to ravage at large as the associates of fraud and mischief, contenting herself thenceforth to shed her influence from afar upon some select minds, fitted for the reception by learning and by virtue. Before her departure, she broke her scepter, of which she shivers, that formed the ambrosial end, were caught up by flattery, and those that had been infected with the waters of lethe were with equal haste seized by malevolence, the followers of flattery, to whom she distributed her part of the scepter. Neither had nor desired light but touched indiscriminately whatever power or interest happened to exhibit. The companions of malevolence were supplied by the Furies with a torch, which had this quality peculiar to infernal luster, that its light fell only upon faults. No light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe. With these fragments of authority, the slaves of flattery and malevolence marched out at the command of their mistress to confer immortality or condemn to oblivion. But this scepter had now lost its power, and time passes his sentence at leisure without any regard to their determinations. So what I gained from that was Johnson's sense that criticism, he characterizes it through the caricature of time and critic and the other various terms. He makes them all capitalized here: fraud, mischief, flattery, malevolence, power, interest. He kind of personifies them, and in the end, what was left, despite it's almost like a story, a myth that at first truth would attempt to dispense justice to the author's works, but in the end, it's left to time to weed out what's worth being remembered, what authors are worth remembering, what works that they've created, and what will be consigned to be forgotten. Very nice.